Imagine, if you dare, the car of the future, made of materials that never rust, a fuel source with extended range, a doubling in passenger safety standards, underpinned with the handling characteristics of a Formula One racing car. Behind this door is a zone where the dream becomes reality with a twist. The DeLorean. No car carries more mystique and conspiracy theories than this one. In this video, I'm going to drive the Time Warp Classic and find out whether DMC could have been the Tesla of the 80s. Behold, the DMC-12, better known as the DeLorean. And I get weak at the knees. I can't stop grinning when I'm around one of these because I grew up in California in the 80s. Never saw a single one of these. They're just such a rarity, it's an oddity, but undoubtedly beautiful car. A classic of its time. It's an 80s icon, largely because of Back to the Future and more recently from Ready Player One. Steven Spielberg clearly was a massive fan of this thing, and largely because it's just so futuristic. Back in the day when it was designed, in the late 70s, first car rolled off the production line in 1981 in January. It was a state-of-the-art project. The whole vision that John DeLorean had was to produce something that would last. Famously, he quit GM, he got fed up with the corporate world, wanted to make something that would be lasting, a unique expression in design, and this was his vision of something that would last the time. Hence the stainless steel body, which doesn't rust. Why don't we make them like that at the moment? It's only the Cybertruck that's really followed in the footsteps of this sort of overall design. John DeLorean was a maverick and a rare breed, an engineer who was also a sales and marketing genius. He could sell snow to the Eskimos, but he was driven by a genuine, all-consuming passion to create the car of the future at any cost. Having travelled the globe looking for investment, he rounded on the idea that a government in dire need of raising employment opportunities might be desperate enough to pile cash into his startup. In the Northern Ireland of 1980, unemployment was nearing 20%, and the British government piled in. And it's undoubtedly beautiful. Giorgetto Giugiaro, I'm just going to call him George because my Italian is that bad. Arguably one of the greatest car designers of all time, rivaled Gandini, made some absolutely fantastic cars. He also made a couple of lemons, like one of the prototype Porsches, where he practiced his hand at the gull wing doors. But the styling on this is really exceptional. You can see a lot of the cues from the Lotus Esprit on which this car is based, the chassis, the drivetrain, not the engine, but it's unmistakably its own creature, very much with an eye to the future of what this car could behold and be. When you're buying your next car, you want to make sure it's got a clean bill of health because you can't always go back in time to change your mind afterwards. If you use carVertical, all you have to do is put your VIN or reg number into carVertical. Within seconds, you get a full report detailing the mileage to make sure it's accurate, see if the car's been crashed, stolen, if it's got legit finance on it or not. It's important you get that right before you buy a lemon. So for example, here's one of my favorites, an Audi S3. All right, let's check out the report. Looks really good in the photos, but it's got hooky mileage. So mileage tends to run forwards, not backwards, unless you're in a time machine. This one was up at about 40,000, drops down to about 30. So someone's clocked the mileage on that one. If we look further into it, it's also an insurance write-off. And I do love the photos that you get. You get the full detail. You can really see what's happened to it. It looks like it's had an acid bath and a really unpleasant time. So if you've got a car that's been written off, that's going to affect its future value. Better you know that before than after you've bought the car, take it home and have a sad face on. So use carVertical. When you use my discount code BCD, you get 20% off, which is a great saving. Click on the link in the description below to find out more. Back to my favourite car. Colin Chapman hated the gull wing design, wanted it got rid of. He thought if the car tipped onto its roof, people get stuck inside. Having spent decades racing in Formula One, he knew a thing or two about cars crashing, the things that drivers could get up to. But DeLorean stuck to his guns, and it was very much a partnership between John DeLorean, the GM executive, making his endeavour to start his own car company in the most outlandish and exotic way, with Colin Chapman's engineering ability and bringing his engineering to the fore with this. The DeLorean is just, I suppose it's like an anti-hero. It's kind of the car that never could have been or never should have been, because it was such a crazy project. To get funding from the British government to the tune of about £90 million, over $100 million, were ploughed in to get a factory up and running in Northern Ireland during a really troubled time in the country, but it brought employment to an area that had huge unemployment. Against all odds, the local hands learned fast, although the early models off the line were, shall we say, full of character. One DeLorean worker described them as dogs. And the first 400 had to be rebuilt by Dick Brown in the USA. A car that was budgeted for a 50-hour build was taking 400 hours per car. The factory had to double production to 100 cars per day, which seemed impossible. But as the factory line gained experience and confidence, a miracle started to happen. By Christmas 1981, production was up to 80 cars per day. As for sales, people took one look at the DeLorean and started throwing money at it. The marketing was slick and professional from the top down. The business cards, brochures, advertising. It was aspirational and here to stay. It must have infuriated Colin Chapman no end that not only had the British government backed a foreign competitor to set up shop in his backyard, but far worse, it was actually working and at scale, and it was essentially a better version of his own design. It gave people a sense of hope that there could be a better future, and this thing is just a piece of art. It still stands the test of time, and although it was criticised back in the day for handling and being a bit underpowered, I'm not so sure that that is the case because I've never driven one, so this is my chance to get behind the wheel. I love the spoked wheels and the wedge design that was all the rage in the 70s and 80s. I think it works really well with this car. You can really see that it's got something special about it. Is it a sports car or a Grand Tourer? Hard to know until you step into the time machine. I think it's time to have a look inside. That packs a punch, that door. They had a lot of trouble manufacturing these doors. These torsion bars had to be cryogenically tensioned, preset. Basically, they were treated to give them a memory so they'd last longer. And 45 years later, it still really has a spring in its step. It's fully functional. And since nobody in the car trade knew how to make them, DeLorean got Grumman Aerospace to do it. You know, the company that designed the Apollo lunar module that landed the first astronauts on the moon. What I like about this, it doesn't feel experimental. It just feels everyday, like every car could and should have gull-wing doors. It's a practical setup. I'm told that they occasionally do leak, but this was built for California weather, and it never rains in Hill Valley, except that one time back in good old 1955 on November the 12th at 5 minutes past 10. Or was it 4? The underlying chassis is straight out of a Lotus Esprit, and it's a Lotus backbone chassis. It's a strong central beam that runs through the middle of the car, and everything is bolted on top of it. So you've got the engine in the back, longitudinal gearbox, keep the weight low and keep it light, which was a Lotus mantra. All the suspension points hang off of that. There's a funky sort of chicken wishbone system at the front, and you've got multi-link suspension at the rear, independent suspension. So it has got some of the benefits of Lotus engineering. It's all about really good handling. On top of that, you've got these Y-shaped mounts, effectively, you can position the fiberglass body onto, and then the panels go on top of that. So these, kind of just like an outer shell, the actual body is underneath it. Inside the car, well, this was designed to be mid-engine until somebody decided they needed more room inside to put their golf clubs. So behind this seat, you've got storage where the engine could have been, and that's really the one big thing that differentiates this car from the Esprit, which is actually a mid-engine. This is now a rear engine car. The engine is a 2.8 litre V6, known as a PRV, because it was used across Peugeot, Renault and Volvo cars. So it was quite a versatile motor and an interesting choice for this car. It uses a mechanical Bosch K-Jet fuel system, which apparently has to be calibrated just right, or it's more temperamental than the flux capacitor. They strangled it a bit in America, 130 brake to meet the emissions regs with the exhaust systems and all that kind of thing, long gearing. But this one is UK spec, which is kind of what it was always intended for, 160 brake horsepower, which is a bit more nifty. Here we go, this thing is awesome. First, you notice it's very low. This car is a manual, so it's got a 5-speed manual gearbox. Now the automatic, I believe, was quoted at doing 0 to 60 in over 10 seconds. The manual, you could do it in 8.5. Glad this is a manual. In the movie, it's not entirely settled what car was being used, because if you look in one of the scenes, when Marty's being chased by the Libyans, he's using gear shift. And then when Doc is using the remote control,
You're gonna see some serious...
that would have been some sort of special effects number, and I imagine that there was a stunt person inside doing a massive wheel spin in first gear. So presumably this may have a limited slip differential. What else? I might be a bit tall for this car, but no, because they've thought of everything. This nice little sculpted area here, it's going to fit my head just right. I like it though. It's quite laid back position, but we are low. We're very Lotus low. Let's bring the thunder. Sorry, the lightning. Is that closed? I'm not sure that's closed. Let's give it one. Wow, it's got some force in that spring still. Whole car shakes when it goes up. Bosh, we're in. And it is quite sci-fi in here. It's fantastic ergonomics, really sort of laid back. I feel like you do a long journey in this. I'm not going to do a long journey, just enough to get a feel for it. There we are. Let's fire this bad boy up. Nice. It's got a good growl to it. I like the intensity. It's got a bit of beef to it. All right, handbrake's off. First gear and away we go. The first thought that's going through my mind driving off in this car is never meet your heroes. That's just because the first thing I'm getting through the steering wheel is a sense of vagueness. There's a fair amount of throw here at the helm before you get a response from the steering. I'm also picking up that there's an amount of tenderness required using the other controls, such as the brake. The throttle has got a nice response to it actually. There's a good burble coming out of this V6. Makes a nice little sound. It buzz up through the revs here, up to 6,000. But when you press the brakes, there's an effect on the steering. This funny wishbone suspension at the front has got a little bit of bump steer going on that also responds to braking. So I think you need to be on your A game, choosing where you point this car at all times. Oh my lord, it is vague as anything. It pulls away beautifully though. Doesn't feel underpowered, but this is the 160 horsepower variant, if you like, the UK spec, even though it's left-hand drive. It's been converted effectively back to UK with the straight pipes that frees up the engine, takes away the wheeze, as Jeremy Clarkson described it. And once you're going along, this car feels good. The ride is fairly lumpy. This is on a Spax suspension shock absorber, and perhaps that's a little bit meatier than the originals that were on this car, but it's supposed to have a similar profile to the original. So I'm experiencing what it would be like to have driven this car back in period. This car has had quite a full restoration thanks to the TLC and love that's gone into it from its owner. You've got to remember though, this car was built in such a hurry. From the launch in 1981 in January, it was only a year later that the company went bankrupt. And you just have to marvel at what could have been. This was really the first car that rolled off the factory. There were going to be more models to follow. If only they'd had the chance to keep making these cars. They were already engineering the turbo variant of this car out in America. They had a twin turbocharged car produced by Legend, who are adjusting the motors with two turbochargers to give this the kind of power you might have expected in a follow-up model. But you wouldn't expect to get a full-blooded, full-powered edition from the first release. This is a really good all-round version to come out of the gates, albeit quite an expensive one. And the car was immediately up against some very stiff competition with the Corvette that was, if you like, a full-blooded American muscle car with lots of power, lots of reliability and seasoned factories, whereas the factory in Belfast really was a fresh, out-of-the-gate thing. They'd not had experience of manufacturing at scale. Only 9,000 of these cars were made in the end because they had such a short time scale to turn around the design and turn it into something that was producible in larger numbers. Yeah, there's a fair amount of wobble, but you kind of get used to it. Now I'm on a dual carriageway, feeling a little apprehensive, if I'm honest, about adding some speed to what is a little bit of a blancmange. But everyone looks at this car, it's just an iconic thing. People have adored them for so many years, and it's hard to believe this car is 45 years old. Despite that, there's no rattles that really sort of make you feel like you're driving something made of glass. It still feels like an essentially pretty well put together car that's delivering what it was designed to do. Inspire the driver, inspire the future of car making. It actually holds its own though at speed. Can I get it to 88 miles per hour and vanish forwards or backwards in time? I think I can. We're just cruising here in third. The gearing is very, very long. The speedo wobbles around. I'm getting jumps of sort of 5 miles an hour. Here we are into fourth gear, and with a significant bounce, I think we're going to make it to 75, which I think is in real world about 70. not going to break the law. You'll have to take it to Santa Pod to really find out whether this will go back in time or not. The long gears were designed to meet the emissions rules in America, so a lot of things hung up on those days in the 80s where there was a major oil crisis, fuel efficiency was key, and the very basic way of overcoming that was to use the Bosch system to try and control the fuel going through the engine, to be moderate with the power output, and to use very long gears to keep the revs down and the consumption low. She's got electric windows, again panned for the extra weight, but you really have to have electric. You can't have a sophisticated futuristic car like this and crank the windows up like a caveman. So I kind of admire it. There they go. Little hatches, little hatches. I noticed that when I'm using the indicators, the voltmeter on the left goes through these little peaks and troughs because the alternator on this is notoriously fickle, and it's a bit like a sort of Apollo 13 mission, calculating how many volts you can afford from each different system. Do I put the stereo on? Probably not. Do I flash the lights? Not a good idea. And if you leave a light on in the compartment overnight, you will almost certainly have a flat battery in the morning. The throw of the gearbox is lovely, super sweet and easy, very drivable unit. I can understand why people would have wanted the automatic as well, but fundamentally this is a Lotus, and it's about handling, and it's about the spirit and freedom of being able to manipulate a car, not the other way around. This is definitely a driver's machine, but you do have to kind of forgive some of the ride and handling qualities that I feel are underneath it. But you feel very, very low, snug to the ground. The weight is kept very low, very Lotus-esque. But there's an amount of wonder that I'm not really accustomed to. That's probably why it got such a hard time with the reviews that came out back in the day. Nevertheless, when this car launched, it was so mesmerizingly beautiful and futuristic that people were throwing down the deposits. They were desperate to get their hands on the DMC-12 up until the point that the economy turned. Just when it looked like DMC was about to shed its startup skin and level out onto real income, a pair of black swan events took a big dump in the party punch bowl. The Great Blizzard of 1981 froze entire economies across multiple states of America. No cars were sold, let alone DeLoreans, and the interest rate doubled to a whopping 20%, can you imagine? With money running dry and the government reluctant to risk further investment, desperate measures were called for. John DeLorean just took that a bit too literally and ended up being entrapped by the FBI doing a bogus drug deal to raise cash. He was acquitted, but it was curtains for the company. Many millions of investors' cash went missing and is the subject of numerous books and investigations. Colin Chapman took the secret of his involvement to the grave. In less than a year from production starting, DeLorean was insolvent, with only 3,000 of the 9,000 cars that were actually made being sold. Well, they've all been sold now, and you just have to wonder what DMC could have turned into with a little more luck and time. The DMC-12 is still elegant and futuristic. It outdrives many modern machines. If DeLorean had been left to their devices for a little bit longer, they could have got out the more sporty models. They could have expanded into the buses and the four-seaters they were looking at. Perhaps the vision, the early vision of creating a brand new company would have come to fruition, and they've been making these cars today. Effectively, this car was one of the earliest visions of sustainability that we can think of. The idea of panels that wouldn't rust, fiberglass body. And the car, I think, is a testament to that, because although the handling is a little bit antiquated, the car fundamentally is still intact. Here we go. Some B-road action. Actually, when you get your foot down, the car kind of absorbs the power and the energy, and you feel the chassis tighten up a little bit. And there's quite a raw experience at the wheel. There's a good amount of torsion coming through the steering wheel, a bit of heft to it, but it's still a tiny bit vague. Point and hope. The placement of the gigantic button that operates the window is exactly where your arm rests, so it's prone to opening when you didn't really want it to, but actually I do want it to because the air conditioning's not working, and probably if it was working it would empty the battery. Oh, sweet! This car just puts a smile on your face. It definitely tightens up when you give it some gas. I think that's what it wants. Pootling along at low speed, the car feels really vague. You can hear every sort of bump and lump. but give it a bit of juice and it livens up. The car tips into the suspension and you start to make the most of these quite big wheels. The instruments are a bit of a joke. The speedo is just all over the place, and so is the fuel gauge. When you accelerate, it just zips the way down to 0. And apparently the speedos are known to be quite unreliable because it's got a wire system that tries to match the speed of the wheels. So quite often you get in these cars, the speedo doesn't work. This speedo is working, which is quite cool. And actually, you lean on the brake pedal, the response isn't bad. It's a slightly mushy pedal, but it does stop you. And actually, I don't notice much pulling at the steering wheel. Despite that funky chicken wing, they've got the suspension on the front, that wishbone. It isn't as bad as I'd expected, again, at a higher speed. So this car's quite beguiling. I think for cruising, it gives you the wrong impression. What it wants is to be given the gun. Of the roughly 9,000 of these machines that were made, only about 5,000, 4,000 still exist. A lot of them have been chopped up and somewhat abused. Partly because coming out of the factory, early days, some of these cars needed a little bit of fine tuning, but towards the end of the production run, these cars really got into their element. The factory workers really knew their game in the short time they've been making them. Not to mention the 2 or 3, perhaps 3, that were gold plated. Can you imagine that? There's a couple in museums and one apparently that's in a box of bits. Would have been striking to see. I'm not sure they ever made it to the road, but it was a very special promotion by American Express. They hoped to make 100 of these limited editions. 3 were made in the end. I still think though that this stainless steel one is the bomb. I love the fact that there were no colours, no options. You just took this one because they made it to the best of their ability, styled to perfection as much as they could, and take it or leave it. I mean, the doors, just the doors alone would sell this car to you. But it's a wonderful bit of kit, and I think it's a fantastic merge between, if you like, American comfort, Italian styling with classical British engineering and handling. Let's take it round the roundabout, see if the wing mirrors end up on the floor. See, that's the thing. Once you lean it, oh yeah, you can feel the grip. Once it leans in, it digs in. Just get a little bit of tyre squeal, not being a hooligan, just feeling it. But there's definitely something controlling the roll in the chassis. So it's a beguiling car. There's kind of 2 levels to it. There's the low speed, kind of like, oh, I'm a bit woolly. Once you start going for it, this thing starts to show you what it's really got. What I could really do is taking this around a racetrack. I wonder if the owner will let me. I doubt it. But there's definitely performance underneath, just well hidden. The sad thing is, the one thing that this car and company needed was a bit more time, which is ironic for a time machine, but I still think that this whole project was a massive inspiration for everybody that was involved with it. Love the padding in the door. So 80s. It's kind of like shoulder pads, but for car trim. It's just lovely.
You gotta see some serious.
88 miles an hour! 1.21 gigawatts! Wah! Alright, nothing happened. I didn't do 88 miles an hour either, to be honest. What this car doesn't deliver at lower speeds is sort of, in terms of ride control and that kind of quality refinement, it does deliver over these really big graduations in the road surface. And the control is there. I've driven cars from the 90s, including BMWs, that will be literally crashing into the surface. You bottom out on bumps like this. And the DeLorean deals with them. I wouldn't say it irons them out, but you don't lose control of the ride height, which is pretty impressive after 45 years. And there aren't many cars from the 80s, from this era, I can say that about. Most of them feel like death traps. Once you get used to what this car is all about, you get used to the fact that there's no power steering, the crazy preschool-sized buttons, and all the quirks with the ride and handling, you really start to love it. And it does transport you back to the 1980s. If you didn't experience the 80s, too bad for you, but we're talking the Pac-Man, the joysticks, and Primitivo stuff, which was extremely cool. But this thing it's a visceral drive. It's got a character and a personality that you really warm to and just want to dig into even more. I would love to see one of these cars reimagined. I think that as a brand, it's got a lot of baggage, but that's not what this car is about. This car was about a dream, and it was a really cool core principles they had behind it. The sustainable materials, futuristic look, the luxuriousness, the opulence of the cabin, which was originally designed to be affordable, it turned out not to be because they found it was more challenging to manufacture than they expected. But I think that with modern techniques, something like this is possible. Whether it would pass the crash testing is another thing. But weirdly, the DeLorean was designed with safety in mind, because these crush structures at the front and rear were designed to withstand an impact, and it actually passed quite well, flying colours even, for the time, for crash safety. But then came Hollywood. Good old 1985. Doc Brown bolted a flux capacitor to the back, and suddenly the DMC-12 wasn't a failed sports car anymore. It was a time machine, a total star, immortality on 4 wheels. The car that stumbled in reality became unstoppable in fiction. And that's become the real DeLorean legacy. Not the sales figures or the bankruptcy or the FBI's sting. It's the idea, the total audacity of one man who wanted to build a car with his name on it, against the odds and against time itself. So the lesson from this tale isn't to sit on the sofa and never take a chance. It shows that you really can make dreams happen. Just look at it.